when you're thinking that you're not good enough, like whose voice is it, or like where did you learn this from?
We live in a time that holding down one job title for a whole career is not possible anymore. At some point of our journey, we can expect a career reinvention is going to happen. So how do we embrace that? What does it take for us to navigate a career reinvention mindfully and sometimes even proactively? On this season of the Everyday Talent Podcast, we are talking about Tales of Reinvention. Tune in as we dive into this topic with fellow creatives and experts. Welcome to the Everyday Talent Podcast. This is your go-to podcast for the most honest look into all things creative career related. I'm your host, Betty. I'm a creative, a nonprofit consultant, and a career and business coach for creative people just like you. Hey, how is everyone doing? Welcome back to another episode of Everyday Talent Podcast. I'm your host, Betty. So, as you listen to this podcast, you probably know that I do career and business coaching for creative people. And if you were to sit me down and ask, Betty, since you became a coach, what is the most popular question that you got asked? I would have to say, is this question: what's the difference of coaching and therapy? And I think this question comes from a place that coaching is still relatively new, and even therapy, I would argue that only in the recent decade that it really caught on the widespread influence that it has today, and people really care about mental health. So in terms of those two disciplines, for a lot of people seeking support in their life and in their career, sometimes it can be confusing to distinguish. And I'm very well aware of that. And on this podcast, I've certainly talked multiple times about, from my perspective, what's the difference of those two disciplines. But I'm also always curious, if I ask a therapist, how would they articulate that difference? And also, when is it best for someone to go seek therapy support? And when is it best for someone to seek career coaching support? So I'm very lucky and honored today. On the podcast, I invited a therapist who is very experienced and has expertise in the field of supporting clients to heal through anxiety, imposter syndrome, and other trauma that they face. Vera Cheng is a registered social worker, psychotherapist, seasoned speaker, and the founder of Talk Therapy with Vera. With over 15 years of devoted work in mental health and racialized communities, she's a leading expert in mental health and anti-Asian racism, featured in renowned media outlets such as CBC News, CB22, and CTV News. Vera opened up with us about her own healing journey today, and she also shared some really practical insights of how, as we deal with our career difficulties and life difficulties, how intergenerational trauma shows up in those moments, and how can we distinguish like what is about healing, the healing work that we need to do going back to our childhood, and how can we carry forward and get support. So without further ado, here's the interview with Vera. Welcome back to another episode of the Everyday Talent Podcast, everyone. So today is a very special episode because I would say that I get to talk to one of the fellow colleagues in the industry. And a lot of times when I'm coaching clients or I'm talking to other people about what I do, I always get raised these questions like, how is a coach different from a therapist? So I thought the perfect way to answer this question is to invite a therapist on the episode, and also someone that I admire her work for. Hi, Vera. Thank you for coming to the episode. Yeah.
Thanks for having me today, Betty.
Thank you so much for coming on. Vera, I would just invite you at the top of this interview to tell us a bit more what you do professionally and how did you come to do what you do?
I'm a registered social worker, psychotherapist, and founder of Talk Therapy with Vera. So prior to starting my practice, Talk Therapy with Vera, back in 2020, I've used to work in the community and medical setting as a social worker, where I provided counseling and case management services. Like I said earlier, when I started my practice in 2020, that's where I provided individual counseling for individuals who struggle with depression, self-esteem, anxiety, which I have also struggled in my entire life. And this would be a great opportunity for me to provide support for others since I didn't start therapy when I was in my late 20s.
Yeah, so you seems like you transitioned to therapy as an occupation, like not initially. That wasn't like your first career, but there was what you started out in community like work.
Yeah,
It's pretty
in,
connected.
exactly. It's very connected because I was still doing counseling with individuals like from when I used to work in the community, like I would work with individuals from teenagers to seniors. But
Mhm.
right now with my practice, I mainly provide therapy services with individuals who are between 20s to 40s.
Okay.
And I would say like majority of my clients are Asian.
Hmm.
Although I was not like when I started my practice, like I was not heavily advertised for the geared for the Asian community, but
Hmm.
somehow they wanting to work with me, during COVID because of the racism that really impacted mental health. But also there was a lot of things that were coming up in their like whether it's in the personal life, in the work life.
I see. Yeah. Um, in the chat, you and I like, chatted a couple times online, and then we also did a pre-call for this interview. One of the things that you told me is that a lot of your clients grew up from that like age 20 to 40 bucket, majority Asian. One of the common like pain points that they face is intergenerational trauma. Can you tell us a bit more about what is intergenerational trauma? How does that show up to your client's life? Well, I can see that being having a very long-term impact. I mean, it literally passed through generation. I can also see that this, like as you were talking, is linked to every facet of an individual's life. I mean, certainly as a career coach or business coach, I have seen it show up in a coaching room where I detect like some intergenerational beliefs around one's self-worth, especially with clients that I work with who are creatives. Like a lot of time there is this like a lot of stigma around
Right.
work in the arts. So I'm curious from your perspective as a therapist, in what ways does intergenerational trauma affects one's choice of career or one's career in general?
So, for example, at workplace, when your boss or colleagues provided constructive feedback for your work, for the work that you did, and then you personalize it, thinking they're being critical to you or thinking that you're not good enough. In reality, their feedback is to really help you grow so that you can become better. But then at the same time that when they give you when they give you the feedback, because you're personalizing it, then you also become emotional in front of them, which is really hard for you to sort of navigate, like to regulate your emotion. And I think that's the hard part when we don't know how to regulate ourselves, but right in front of our peers or like our boss when they're providing constructive feedback, right? Because then it's really about they're not. That's when it come. Then that's really have to click into your head that you need to start reframing and telling yourself they're helping me. They're not being mean to me. I think that's also very important because sometimes that when you get triggered, then you start thinking about, oh, they're saying that I'm not good enough. Then I'm relating it back to how whoever in your childhood is being critical to you,
Mm.
right?
Oh, yeah, I'm seeing the chain effect. Uh, so like what I'm hearing from that is that in adult lives, when we hear constructive feedback, it is hard for us to regulate if we have an intergenerational trauma, distinguish what is constructive or not almost,
Mm-hmm.
because like
Mm-hmm.
we sometimes we default back to that mode of defending ourselves or protecting ourselves from those like beliefs that were kind of ingrained to us perhaps in childhood,
For
and
sure.
how to navigate that situation. And same thing with like I when I see clients experience like career setback,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen clients quickly go to that place of like, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough.
Right.
In a sense that sometimes there is some trauma related issue there that is
Right.
deeper than the current context of the issue. Yeah.
Because you also have to think about like, is it professional for me to be reactive or like being emotional in front of my boss or my colleagues?
Mm-hmm.
right? When I'm having a trouble regulating myself, right? I think that's also very important. Like, can you, regulate your, meaning like, can I take some deep breath that like that I should not like reframe it. This is not personal. You
Mm.
can be like upset, right? Like I mean, like behind closed door, whether you go to the washroom or you go home, like being able to reflect and regulate your emotion. But I think in that moment when you're in front of other people, you have to figure out who are around you.
Right. I'm thinking that like a tool that often uses like the three circles of influence or control. Like what can you control, what can you influence, what's completely outside of your control.
That's right.
And then like when you're emotionally unregulated, it's like a lot of things are outside of your control.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm. So what does the healing process look like for something as deep-rooted as intergenerational trauma? And I know that you've mentioned that in your whole life you've been doing a lot of healing. So perhaps I can invite you to share a bit about your personal journey, but also what are the ways that you guide clients to do healing?
Right. So, I've been in therapy and getting support from both my mentor and my therapist,
Mm,
where like with my personal and my career, but also they let me know about how proud they are of me because of what I've gone through. Like
mm,
they like I've started been with them for like I don't know 5+ years, maybe longer. I can't remember the exact time, just because I have done like different therapists in the past. And it's like recognizing the healing, it's not like linear. It's not like a one size fit all, and you have to recognizing that healing also takes time. And it's not like tomorrow, like you go to therapy once and tomorrow everything it's going to be like fixed.
mhm,
It doesn't work that way. And I think that you know you also want to be like realistic about like what you really wanted to work on in your like part of your healing journey, and how do you go about it. Because as a therapist, I also give out, sometimes I give out homework and assignment. I always tell my
mm,
client like, you also need to do the work, right? As your therapist, I'm more like a guide to help support you and guide you
mhm,
through the journey that you want to go. And the healing journey is supposed to be uncomfortable, right? It's
mm,
not supposed to be that's why it comes with a lot of different challenges, because sometimes that we don't want to talk about certain issues, certain things, but you have to recognize that if we don't talk about it, how do you think you're supposed to heal, right? Because that's just
mhm.
avoiding it. That's not really helping you at all.
Yeah. You touch on something that I really want to ask a follow-up questions, which is because I tell clients right at the beginning that we work in like a value alignment documents that like, the learning or like when you're doing the coaching work or
Hmm.
like working with a coach, you will experience moments that are uncomfortable because you're challenging your comfort zone. But it shouldn't be unsafe. So like there's a distinguishing factor between being safe, emotionally safe,
For sure.
and feeling challenging and uncomfortable. So I'm curious from your perspective, like how, like if someone was going through the healing work and feels
Hmm.
uncomfortable, how can they distinguish feeling uncomfortable and feeling like completely triggered and unsafe?
So sometimes that, when I always inform my clients, there are certain times when we speak about certain topic or certain issue, they get really triggered. They need to
Mm,
tell me right away, like when they get uncomfortable within their body, and and experience some sort of different like body sensation, whether it's heart palpitation, tightness of chest, or like lightheadedness,
mm,
etc., then they need to inform me right away. Like, Vera, like, can we pause? Like, I'm getting uncomfortable in the body, like right now. Then I'll pause.
mm,
Then we'll pause the session, whatever we're talking about. We'll process what's happening in your body and what is it that was really triggering. Is it
mm,
certain topic that was bringing up like certain memory of like, unhappy, etc. I think that's also very important for
mm.
us to like, because our mind, our body, it's connected to one another.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm hearing, yeah, I like the approach because what I'm hearing that is that you're kind of providing a safe space for kind
Hmm.
to name the triggerness in their body, and also in the process like I think that has an impact in subconsciously training the client to be able to name those discomfort.
Yeah, because if they go home, like they got triggered in a session, but they didn't tell me right away, and they went home. I always tell them like, I can't help you because you went home and I can't help you to process what's happening. And then, if you're telling me in a moment in a session that you're able to, like, you're getting triggered, at least we can work on it, but we'll also be able to build the therapeutic alliances. That's also very important, right? It also means that when you're opening up to me, it also means that you feel safe to tell me what's really happening within yourself.
Yeah. I think both in the coaching relationship and the therapy relationship, that building that trust between the client and us is very important, because once there's a safety and trust established, it opens up a new world that like the client is able to fully give themselves to you. Yeah.
For sure. And it's scary to be vulnerable, right? Especially, they don't really know me and they're just starting to like wanting to work with me. And I also have to, validate them that, what, thank you so much for like telling me. I know it's not easy, but you also took the courage, right, to, get started with therapy. You knew that you needed to get support. I think that's something that that's something that I would tell them, like, you need to recognize that, please. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a phrase in coaching that is like see, stretch, and support. That is like, I'm hearing like a common kind of like connection there. It's like you see them, you're there to stretch them in terms of like they're doing the work, they came to you,
Right.
there's a reason, and then to support them as well.
For sure. For sure. I think that obviously, like, going back earlier about the healing journey, is that you have to be ready to get help. If other people, I'm just saying, if your family, your colleagues, or your partner are telling you, no, you need to get help, but you're not ready, but that's not going to work either, because you're not ready. You have to be ready to wanting to work on yourself. So
What does being ready mean then? Like, how does one know I'm ready?
everyone is different, right? Because they know that they've been having this issue like over and over again. They try many different things and nothing is working. Or they thought that it's working, but it's not working out for them. And then they felt like, okay, well, if I go to see a therapist, a professional, at least they can provide me with strategies or techniques, but also being able to process their childhood or the past of why they become of who they are today. That's also very important. So I have I have a lot of people reaching out to me, doing consultation, that they're wanting to work with me because they saw my content on Instagram, and I'm like, because they really resonate with them. That also mean that they're ready to get support, because whatever I'm saying on my posts or etc., when it resonates with them, it kind of clicked in their mind that like, oh no, I need to talk to like somebody professional. Yeah.
And like, I follow your content as well, and I see that probably, when you say that, like, you're also sensing a value alignment with the people who are doing the consultation call, because you're not just putting some random posts out there, or you're very
No.
specific about what you're talking about.
Exactly. I think that's why my clients, like I said, I think that's why the Asian community, the Asian client reaching out, is because of the content I put out. That's how it really resonate with them, and how I'm also able to sort of like connect with them with my own personal experiences about like with my own mental health journey.
Yeah. What was your mental health journey, if you feel comfortable sharing some of that? Like, how
Sure.
have you overcome some of the trauma that you
Yeah.
experienced?
I mean, I believe I started therapy. Well, first I was born in Hong Kong, moved to Toronto in the 90s. We've been here for 30 years now. And when we first moved here, like, I've experienced racism, but also like bullying from other kids, as well. But then at that time, I didn't even know where to seek support, because English was my second language. So, and it was quite hard. And then, the bullying, the racism really impacted my mental health, with like depression, anxiety. And then it really translated into my work life experiences, where I would get really anxious and stressed out at work. And then eventually I've went to see a psychiatrist, and was doing assessment, I was doing like one-on-one session with them, following up, and I was also prescribed with medication. And my psychiatrist at that point was like telling me like, oh, you should really see a social worker and or a therapist, to work through some of your issue of like, how to deal with stress or anxiety, etc. I think that's also very important. Then from then on, like I saw like multiple different therapists until until I stuck with this one right here that where I've been seeing, like I said, where I've been seeing them for like about 5+ years, where I still work through my own like journey with my dealing with my parents or like with my family or dealing with work related issue. Yeah.
You know what I hear there is that the healing journey is a lifelong journey. Like
Yes.
just because, like similar to me, I have see therapists, I see a coach, like, you have your therapist, like it doesn't end just because you become the professional in that field.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that, like, because I think your age demographics are the age demographics of like these podcasts as well. So Gen Z and millennial. So I'm curious, like, have you noticed some common trends of like the kinds of, let's just say, not pinpoints, but like domains of like areas that they're looking for healings that emerge from this age demographics?
I felt like it's always about like depression, anxiety,
Mm.
self-esteem, and part of imposter syndrome regarding with the work. That's how they felt, or they'll get triggered from their parents because they're the primary caregiver, or from their parents, or they still live at home, and that's how
The
I think that
expectation with the
exactly,
parents.
exactly. That's how they get triggered, right? Or like, or they would say like, you know, whatever they're doing in their career choices is not good enough because like obviously, in the Asian culture, our parents expect us to be like a lawyer, accountant, right? Like doctor. But then I'm like, are these really like realistic? Because it's not really what you want, or it's not really that's their expectation. It's not what you really want, right? So I think there's a lot of times that my folks is also having a hard time regulating emotion because they still constantly think there's an inner critic within themselves that they're not good enough. And I would have to challenge them, like, well, whose voice are these, right? Like, when you're thinking that you're not good enough, like, whose voice is it? Or, like, where did you learn this from? I think that's also very important for us, like, for me to help them process.
I love that question. Whose voice is it? Like, because usually that opens up, a rabbit hole of like going back if the client is reflective, being able to identify perhaps in their childhood.
That's
And
right.
often it comes from somewhere or an incident. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Because I always tell them, like, when I'm doing my consultation call, like, it's always our childhood. It's the one who are shaping us of who we are today. Yeah.
So it sounds like your clients are like at that juncture that they figure out their life and like often career shows up. I want to take this opportunity for you and I to chat about the
Yeah.
difference between a career coach and a therapist and the work they do, because I get this question a lot. At what point do you refer a client like, I think you should go see a coach?
Oh, like like I've referred a couple of my clients to go to see a career coach because when they're thinking about like a different career or like they're not happy where they are, they want to switch career. But then that's when the coach can help them to do an assessment to figure out what the strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah.
Or even helping them like, to, fix up their resume, right? Or even like prepping for the interview. That's also very important when it comes to like the career coaching, because for me, like, I'm only really just to help them process like, what they want in life, but also figuring out, like, help them process like why do they get triggered at work, or why do they get triggered as with certain people from work, right? I think that's also very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm nodding my head constantly, and maybe I can share some of my
Yeah.
perspective. I've also referred people, well, I've recommended people to go see a therapist because I think,
Right.
all that you talk about, that like where, people are like navigating a job change or career change, that is when a coach is very helpful.
Right.
However, so like in the coaching world, we acknowledge that trauma shows up and their childhood is interconnected, their inner child is present in the room. However, like where my work stops is I always ask kind for permission of like how far is that connected to the work, because my role here is to support them from here forward.
For sure.
Whereas the deep healing is really done in a therapy room.
For sure.
So I think there is like almost like a temporal difference of like where each of the work and support is important for
That's right.
someone's life. Yeah.
Yeah. And oftentimes like they do find career coaching can be quite helpful about like, thinking about what their next step should be in their career choices, or trying to figuring out, do they need to go back to school for something they wanting to do, right? But then they don't have certain experiences, or they don't have the knowledge, then they definitely need to go back to school. But they also need to figure out, like, the career coach can also help them figure out like what field that they can get in too.
The clarity of like what they actually want and the next steps. Yeah. Yeah. Vera, what's next for you? What's your hopes and dreams as you go forward and build your therapy business?
That's a really good question. As you know, like, I don't just do therapy. I also do, I also do speaking engagement.
Yes.
I speak about mental health, but also like how to deal with mental health in a workplace setting. I talk about like burned out. Like, one of my signature topic is how to regulate emotions, that I have spoken about multiple times. I also do therapist coaching, more like a business coaching for new therapists who want to get into private practice. Yeah, for like
so valuable.
Yeah, for like who want to get into private practice. So that's also important. I've done a lot of different like collaborative projects where I was last year and earlier this year, where I collaborated with CMHA York Region on a mental health project to promote their mental health program.
Wow, you've won really, like, even though your practice is very focused in one discipline, this is often when I call it like, you have one focused discipline, but you have a very multifaceted business.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Like, I just felt like I can't really just base my practice on just therapy on itself. So like, I just thought it would just be better for me just to like, open up different opportunities for myself. Yeah. But it's still within the mental health field, right? I think that's also very important.
And that's like, I think, speaks to your long-time passion in the field and how you can make a difference through different engagements.
For sure.
So for listeners of this podcast, whether they are looking like interested to work with you, or they might be a therapist in training looking to get more business coaching, or whoever, how can they connect with you and where they can find you?
So my website, it's talktherapywithvera.com, and my Instagram handle, it's talktherapy.with.vera.
We will include all those links in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can just like scroll and then like click on the links and connect with Vera.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vera, for sharing your expertise and your personal journey with us today. It's so valuable.
Thanks for having me today, Betty.
I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as I did. I always feel that with every expert guests that I bring on the podcast, I'm learning as I interview them as well. It's truly an honor. I'm so grateful that Vera shares her perspective as a psychotherapist, how she supports clients to do some healing. And if you're interested to do the healing work and ready for it, I recommend that you reach out to Vera. And if you're at that spot where you're figuring out the next steps in your career and wondering how to do a mindful reinvention, or if you're a self-employed person and wanting to get a boost to move beyond aimless freelancing to actually owning your creative business and have a freeing structure that transforms your self-employment into the best job ever, talk to me. I offer free consultation call for my one-on-one coaching programs, and I've supported creatives of all disciplines to make those moves and chart an inspire path forward. If you are listening to this podcast and you love it, I recommend you to follow the podcast for future episodes and also share the podcast with your friends so that more creatives can get support and feel seen. May we all bring intentionality into our life, whether it's for the healing work that we do or for planning and strategizing what's next in our career. I'll see you on the next episode.